All right, this is a speech given by the Lubavitcher Rebbe in 1991. Kitetse. Here we go. Haseder de Kriyas Torah, the order of the reading of the Torah, is Makom Shemafsikim B'Shabbos Shachris Sham Koren B'Mincha. We religious Jews, so every Shabbat in the daytime, we read a portion of the Torah. There's 52, 53 portions that we read. Sometimes there's double portions that we read together, but it's a different portion. But that's what we read. And the Mincha, which is the last prayer of the Shabbat, that's like the next day. So we read a little bit of the next week's portion. So it says the place where we stopped reading in Shachrit, in the morning prayer, that's where we resume to pray, to read from the Torah and Mincha. How so? Shabbat Rishon, the first Shabbat, we read Breshit. In Mincha, we read Noach. 10 sentences or more. Similarly, it is the whole entire year. We read the whole Torah portion, and then the Mincha prayer, which is like, 12 hours later or something. On the Mincha prayer, we read a little bit, 10 sentences at least 10 sentences from the next week's portion. Asher b'kriya shtei parshas, when you read this, so it ends up that every Shabbat we read 2 Torah portions, the entire Torah portion for that Shabbos, in the beginning for next week. So it must be that they have a connection one to the other. Now the word Torah means teaching. Hora'ah means teaching. So everything in the Torah comes to teach us something about how to live and be better human beings. Tzorech lav, we have to understand, and regarding to these 2 Torah portions that we read on this Shabbat, this coming Shabbat, Parshat Kitetse, we read in the morning, and Parshat Kitavo that we read in Mincha. 2 Torah. You look in your Chumash, in your Bible, and you'll see that we're getting close to the end of the last book of the Torah, right? So these are sentences. Kitetse, Kitavo. What does it mean? Kitetse, that's this week's Torah portion. When you go out to war against your enemy. And Kitavo starts off with the words, when you come into the land that I promised you. Kitetse, so that implies going out to war. And Kitavo, that implies coming back home. Shame, it seems that they are 2 opposites in the name of the Torah portions, which indicate on 2 different things. Teitze v'tavo. First of all, simply, Teitze means to go out, and Tavo means to come back. Shiyatzia obia, that going out and coming back, these are 2 opposite things, one from the other, simply. And also in their content, in the beginning, it says, what's the content? Okay, the words are the opposite, going out and coming back. But also, where are you going out to? To war. You go out to war. And in the second, in Mincha, we read, Kitavo el ha'aretz, when we come to the Holy Land. V'yirishta, and you take it over and you dwell in it. Shiyatzil milchama, that going out to war and coming back to the land of Israel. These are 2 totally opposite situations, one from the other. Shekain, that also av sheben milchama hi ba'ofen v'natnu Hashem alokechem unatana, that natno Hashem, that God gave it, natano, that God gave it into your hands and you conquered it. True, you go out to war. God promises you will succeed in the war, you'll win. But nevertheless, it still is, war is the opposite of menucha v'tyashvut. It says that if the Jews do what God wants, that no one will get killed in war. But nevertheless, you got to go out to war, right? A person would rather sit at home and then paint his house or learn Torah or do something positive, spend time with his kids, instead of going out and schmeicing people and cutting them up and getting all bloody and everything like that. So true, you're going to win the war, but it would be better if there wasn't the war at all, right? But still, if so, even though God promises you're going to win the wars, that God will give it to you, nevertheless, it's a situation of lack of, rest and equilibrium. Oh, Kamukas, like also says what the Rambam says, that since when a person goes into war, right, Jewish people, when they go into war, so what is a soldier? Rambam gives advice to the soldiers, according to the Torah. When a soldier goes out to war, what should he do? Yish'an al mikveh Yisrael, he should rely totally on the hope of Israel, on God. V'yasim nafsho b'kapo, and he should put his life into his hand. In other words, he should know that any second he could get killed. V'lo yachsho v'lo b'ishto, he shouldn't think about his wife and not his children or anything. Yifne, and he should think only about the war and winning the war. B'kol libo, b'kol nafsho. Thinking only about his how do you say, with all of his heart and with all of his soul, think only one thing: winning the war. Don't think about coming back home. Don't think about your house. Don't think about your future, your past, nothing. Your whole job in war is only fighting. Hepech tachlis is the opposite of being settled in the land of Israel and calm. Ish tachet gafno, ish tachet teinato. Each person under his own is a vineyard and under his own fig tree. Ba'ad lahavad bikurim, until it says in next week's Torah portion that you bring first fruits after you divide up the land. Mereishit kol pri adama, the first fruits of the land. From the 7 types of land that is Israel's 7 fruits, right? With grapes and figs and dates, and both in the samachta b'kol hatov. So next week's Torah portion talks about you're settled in the land, you harvest the land, you grow, you have a beautiful fruits, you bring them to the temple, you're happy with God. Every moment of your life you feel is just an amazing gift and a happiness. Like it says, mitoch hityashvut v'menucha shlem. In a simple way, next week's Torah portion, you're just happy being alive. You're happy being a creation of God. You realize the greatness of the Creator and how lucky, amazingly lucky we are every single second that we're alive. How fortunate. That's next week. This week's Torah portion, we're the boss. We take the sword, we take the gun, whatever it is, we take the spear. We have to go out and fight. We can't be happy, not a second, right? Your whole thing is running in and fighting. You have to think positively and forget about the enemy and forget about his sword. No negative thoughts whatsoever. You have to force yourself. You're in war. That's this week's Torah portion. Kitetse. Kitavo is you don't have to force yourself to think good. You're surrounded by good. You're surrounded by the miracles of God. And we read both of them in the same Shabbat. War and peace and comfort. Al-Derech says similarly also, how can it be both together? We'll see. Also, the same thing with the content of the service of man of these 2 Torah portions. This week's Torah portion, when you go out to war on your enemy, more of this indicates the nefesh elokis, the going out of the godly soul, mishor shol makora, from its source, and it's coming down. The godly soul coming out from its source in the world of Atzilut, what do you want to call it, these different Kabbalistic levels. Like it says in the Shama, the soul comes from its source of purity, and it goes out to war. Later it comes down, ad to the physical world. Al derech also at barata, comes down to the world of Bria, to the world of Yetzira. Benafachta becomes into the physical world, to be put into a body and an animal soul. That's what it means going out to war. Spiritually, going out to war means the pure, holy, pristine, godly soul goes out from its holiness and its pristineness and its whole, whatever it is, its highness, its purity. It goes out and it comes into this low physical world that there's absolutely nothing pure and pristine, and you're just surrounded by all sorts of confusion and temptations and things that drive you crazy, put into the animal soul. Why are we put into this crazy world? It's like a war in order to purify it and refine it. That's what we're learning about in Chassidut, right? Until you also not just fix up your own soul and your own attitude and your own feelings and your actions and your reactions, but also you fix up the world. Like we said, remember in the end, raising up these sparks, that this service is a way of war. It's a war against your enemy. Who is your enemy? Yourself. Ubafrat, and especially B'Zaman HaGalut, in the time of the exile. Shemitzad Helam Esther, in the time of the concealment and the, when you call it, the hiding of God, the Cheshkas HaGalut, because of the darkness of exile, Mud Gashoter Tokef Hamanagid, we can stress more, is more stressed, the power of the opposition, to the point where people think there's no opposition, that this is the way things are supposed to be. So therefore, you have to make a war. I mean, that's sort of, if you want to say, where Reform Judaism came in, they don't want to make this war. Why should we fight against the world? Why should we be different? Why should we defy the whole, how do you say, humanity? What everybody does, why shouldn't we just be like everyone else? What's the problem? Right? Just dissolve, flow with the flow, right? Why not? So says the Rebbe, this is not actually, a pretty bad idea. It's the opposite of what Judaism is. But on the other hand, who wants to fight? Who wants to have this battle all the time? And it says, don't worry, if you go out to battle, you'll win. That's only if you go out to battle, you win. But before you go out to the battle, it's obvious that you're not going to win. And you're outnumbered 1,000 to 1, 1,000,000 to 1. And you're out, not only outside, you're also outnumbered inside. All of your thoughts, all of your worries. Who needs all these worries and trepidations and negative thinking? Just don't go to war at all, right? Don't go to war and you have no problem. Keep that. That's this week's Torah portion. Next week's Torah portion is exactly the opposite. And you will inherit it and you will live in it. This shows on what? Menucha v'shalom, peace and, how do you say, rest. You want to call it homeostasis? Sort of not. Okay. Calm. Shalom. Shalom is nothing better than shalom. Shalom. That's how we end up our prayers every day. Shem Yavorech Adamo Shalom, Baruch Atah Hashem, Mavorech Zalma Yisrael, but Shalom, peace. Who wants peace? Is the greatest thing. Peace is the greatest thing. There's a Manchi Yisrael, the time when the Jewish people are sitting in their land, and they are in the Holy Temple, is on its place, like in the days of King Solomon. This is the opposite of what we say in going to war on your enemies. So the goal is peace. What do you have to have this thing about war for? Just make peace, that's all. There's a lot of religious Jews also that say you have to have peace. How do you have peace? Not make a war. You wall yourself in. Wall yourself in. You stay in the yeshiva. You stay in your little community. You stay, or your big community, whatever it is. Very nice idea. And you sit and learn Torah, do the commandments. That's it. You made it. You have Torah. You have commandments. You have this. You have peace. You have everything. Says the Rebbe, until the whole world is fixed up, we got to go to war. But we'll see what type of war the Rebbe is talking about. Not killing people, God forbid. Od ve'ikr, and the main thing is, a token, the main thing of kitavo el ha'oretz, ve'rishta v'yeshavta bo, and you'll conquer it and you'll live in it, that we read in the Torah, that's in Mincha. This is eternal. B'yom zeh, it's talking about right now. Shayach Gam, the main thing is coming at the land of Israel, conquering it, living in it, or it's la'atid labo in the future, begula mitit v'shlema, then it'll be for sure, by means of the Mashiach, then he'll bring all the Jews to Israel. Only the Mashiach is going to do it, by the way. Don't believe those who say we can do it politically, we can do it ideologically, we can do this. Not so. The Rambam, Maimonides, and he's the only one that says this in a clear legal way, that Mashiach is going to build a temple, and that's what's going to draw the Jews back to Israel. But nevertheless, it'll be in a peaceful way. According to this, now we can understand the big difference between the Torah portions of going out. But it's relevant every day, this coming into the land of Israel. So that's what it is when you're going out to war and you're coming into peace. That we read on the same day, Shabbat, These are not just two different ways of serving God, and a way of war and a way of peace, that they are different one from the other. But chilu kloli, this is a general service of God, avodah l'sachar, serving God, and the reward for serving God. What's the reward? That this world will be a perfect place. What's the service? The war. And they're together at the same time. How is it going to be? Shaparshat Kiteitzei, that the whole of this week's Torah portion we've written about is talking about what we have to do, our service and our deeds that we have to do now, the whole time of the exile. That's Kiteitzei. What we read in the Mincha of Shabbat, Kitavo, that's next week's portion, that's talking about the reward that we're going to get in the future. But they're read at the same time. This is also stressed in what? And there's the work and the reward will be together. The work we see, but how do we see the reward? The Rebbe will explain. And is that this is also when we read also Pirkei Avot. Next week, like I said, we a lot of religious Jews, they read what's called Pirkei Avot, the 6 chapters of the ethics of the fathers, the chapters of the fathers. And they read one chapter every Shabbat. But they try to finish it, and they do finish it before Rosh Hashanah. So as a result, now, this coming Shabbat, we're going to read the first chapter. But there's only 3 Shabbats left until Rosh Hashanah. So we have to read 2 every Shabbat. So next Shabbat, we read first chapter 1 and 2. Also, we can see the same message is found in Pirkei Avot. The first chapter is Moses received the Torah from Sinai and he gave it, etc., to all the Jewish people until the end of the generations. And what does it say? What's the lesson? It says, make a lot of pupils. This is a stress, the whole thing of the service of the Jewish people doing the Torah. That's the first chapter of Pirkei Avot. Working. That's like Kiteitzei leMilchama. The Sof Perek Sheni, in the end of the second chapter of Pirkei Avot, chapters of the fathers, what does it say over there? You should know that the reward, Matan Scharim Shel Tzadikim, is going to be in the future. So you should know that the reward for the righteous is going to be in the future. That's talking about the reward. So this week's Pirkei Avot begins talking about the work. Pirkei Avot, work, learn Torah, pass it down, have a lot of pupils. And the second chapter talks about reward. And we read both chapters this Shabbat, both chapters. The reward and the work come together. Even though that these are really 2 different things. And also in Pirkei Avot, there's 2 different chapters and there are 2 different times. Like one says, the work is done now and the reward is going to come in the future. Like it says, Hayom Lasotam, that today we do the work and tomorrow, in days of the Moshiach, we receive the reward. But nevertheless, we read both of them in one Shabbat, in one continuation, and in one unit. What's the explanation of this? The explanation is like this. Hatchalat Kriya, beginning reading Kitavo, after reading Parshat Kiteitzei, reading about the reward coming to the land of Israel, having peace, immediately after reading about going out to war, is a pirush and a biur. It's an explanation for Parshat Kiteitzei. That also, when you do a war, when you are fighting against your own selfish impulses, your own ignorance, your own misconceptions, when you're fighting against your own false, improper reactions to the world, your improper projections to the world, you have to make a war on your enemy. The Rebbe once said that what's the way to defeat all of our enemies? So the Rebbe said every Jew has a little Gentile inside, a little anti-Semite inside. Every Jew has a little anti-Semite inside of himself, a little selfish, core of selfishness inside of himself. So the language of the Rebbe was, every Jew has a little Gentile inside. If you defeat the Gentile inside, then you can defeat the Gentile outside. If you don't defeat the Gentile that's inside, you don't make war, and you don't defeat the Gentile outside. And I'll tell you one more thing, which is, I think, very beautiful. I just remembered. There was a wonderful person. His name was Zusha Vilomovsky. There's a lot of stories that are told about Zusha Vilomovsky. Anyways, he was a Chassid Chabad, a religious person. He had a beard and everything like that. He had been in the Polish, whatever it is, underground against the Germans. He was what's called a partisan. The Rebbe used to call him a partisan. Anyway, so he used to, it used to be in Israel that the leftists in Israel were very, very anti-religion. Very, and especially they hated the religious Jews. They hated them tremendously. And the religious Jews, they had their own political parties and they had war with the. And this Zusha Vilomovsky, and Chabad was not into politics. Chabad never got into politics. The Rebbe made us not get into politics. We would have loved to get into politics, but the Rebbe said we can't get into, so we didn't get into politics. So no, getting it. Why do these other groups get into politics? It's because you're close to the money, and they need desperately money in order to keep the yeshivas going. They need money. So they went into politics. They got money, but Chabad didn't go into politics. So where did they get funding from? So this Zusha Vilomovsky, he used to go to all of these high, the departments of education, the departments of culture, departments of this, and he made friends with people, and they would give Chabad money, and he didn't make any promises, and he didn't make any deals. He wasn't the type of person at all. And so they asked him, how in the world do you get along with all these people? I mean, some of these people, they're just so, they hate religion. They're outspoken about it. And with you, they get along with you. What do you do? I mean, you have some sort of secret. He said, when there's a war inside, then there's peace outside. Not very deep, I think. When there's war inside, in other words, when I fight against my own selfishness and inside, then there's peace outside. People recognize it. They realize that I'm only here for the truth. I'm not here for my own personal agenda or and Chabad is not here for their personal agenda. It's something good. That when you make war inside, and then there's peace outside. Okay, so this is sort of the point the Rebbe is making here. Okay, so it says you have to have them both together. When you make war, the war has to be in a way of peace and equilibrium. Ki tavo ala oretz, like coming to the land and getting the reward, and even more. Shebachalalas avoda, the whole service of a Jew in the world going out to war has to be already me'ain, something like the dugma and an example of hitchila, that it also already begins reward. I'll have to turn somebody's thing off. Ella, 1 second, 1 minute. I got to turn off. So you did pretty good up to now, but I'm going to have to turn off. I can't do this. All right, we're almost finished anyway. Please try not to yell for the next 2 minutes, and we're almost finished. There we go. So we can say that this is also Kiteitzei Atzmo, in Parshas Kiteitzei itself, that it talks about what? The commandment that later on, Schar Sechir. There's a lot of commandments in this Parshat Kiteitzei. There's like 73 commandments or something, 72 commandments. We'll go over it at 3 o'clock, God willing. I'll try to go over all the commandments at 3 o'clock. The commandments, there's 73. One of the commandments is Schar Sechir. What's Schar Sechir? If someone works for you, you're supposed to pay them at the end of the day. If you make an agreement that it's at the end of the week, that it's okay. But if they don't make an agreement, you're supposed to pay. You're supposed to pay at the end of the day. Move, and so it's understood. Also in reward for our service to the Jewish people by means of God. We're working for God, right? What's our reward? Moshiach, peace in the world. World prosperity. Meaning, blessing. That's the reward. So when's that going to come? Moshiach is supposed to come any second, but we've been waiting for 2,000 years. Says the Rebbe, no, that's not exactly the way it goes. God has to pay us on the day that we work. But dugmas balabayat, like a boss that hires workers to do work, and he has to pay their work, like it says a Mishnah of Pirkei Avot in this Shabbat. Benosef lamatan scharon shel tzadikim latid lavo. In addition to the fact that the tzadikim, which means Jews that want to do what God wants, their reward is in the future. Lamachar tzchar, in other words, receiving the reward tomorrow. But really, in a way, that's okay. That's what God's going to do, but it's not right. God also has to do what He says in the Torah. He has to pay us on the day that we work. And we're going to explain how this works, God willing, tomorrow. So like I said, God willing, I'm going to try to pre-record the classes, and I'm going to put them up, and you'll see on YouTube. I hope you have the YouTube address on how to do it. If so, I can give it to you. We'll see, maybe later on. YouTube address. And you can look up, you see the classes, and I'll list it. This is the class for Monday, class for Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. All right, now let us do the Yom Yom, and then we'll have the Tkiyah Shofar, and then we'll talk. Anybody wants to talk, we'll talk. The Tzemach Tzedek said 3 things by which he was successful at the Rabbinical Convention of Petersburg. The Tzemach Tzedek, the Tsarist government was very, very anti-Semitic, and nothing like the communists, but nevertheless very anti-Semitic. And they were always making decrees against Jewish education and Jewish books and this. And the rabbis simply didn't know what to do. Right? I mean, their lives were at stake, and the pressure was terrible. But the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Rebbe of Chabad, he defied them totally, and he was imprisoned 20 times by the Tsarist government. There's long stories about this. So the only way he was successful at the Rabbinical Convention, he convinced all the other rabbis that they also should defy the Russian government, the Tsarist government. How did he succeed? One of the merits that he had was 32,000 hours that he labored over the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe was the first Rebbe of Chabad, was his grandfather. The discourses over the span of the 30 years from what is this? 5664, from 1804 until 1834. He designated a special period to study the Alter Rebbe's discourses, and in 1834 he began to publish them, and that's Likutei Torah. That's what we're learning over here. That's what we're learning. And okay, now we'll set on the shofar, and then we'll talk. Ready? Tkiyah Shvorim Teruah Tkiyah. Now, Tkiyah, Teruah, Tkiyah, Shvorim, Teruah. Tkiyah, Shvorim, Tkiyah. And now Tkiyah is the straight blast. Teruah, Tkiyah. Okay, have a good day with Moshiach. Now, God willing, at 3 o'clock, we will have a class. Hope to see you all. Shalom uvracha. All right, anyone who wants to talk, we can talk. I'm stopping the recording.